learning curve of making a reel look like a reel. Kapai. You ready?
Kapai. Kia ora tātou. He ruruku. Mo te ata. Marama ka marama tākiri ko te ata. Korihi ko te manu. He manu korori, he manu korora. Kōrero tea no tua whakarere. Nau mai te ao. Haere rai te pō. Tihei mauri ora. Kia ora tātou, and welcome along to this webinar series being hosted out of Healthy Families, Waitakere. I'm ko Waio e tuatu nei, ko Aorangi te maunga tapu, ko Rangitīkei, ko Mua Whangorahi, ngā awa, ko Aorangi, ko Ruahine te paimaunga, he uri mokopuna ahau o ngā iwi nui tono o Mōkai Pātea, te iwi roa. So, ko Meretini Bennett-Huxtable tōku ingoa. I'm the Rautaki Māori of Healthy Families, Whanganui, Rangitīkei, Ruapehu, and coming to you today with a kōrero around a systems approach to growing collective wellbeing through the use of the Maramataka Māori. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Ka pai. So what is this kōrero? So Maramataka, a systems approach to growing collective wellbeing. So prevention solutions, so what we believe here throughout this work for healthy families and for our kahui Māori, we believe that Mātauranga Māori systems such as Maramataka are prevention solutions for growing health and wellbeing amongst our community. So when I talk about prevention solutions, when it comes to prevention health outcomes in Aotearoa, Mātauranga Māori knowledge and systems have the power to transform the way whānau make decisions in the places where we live, learn, work and play. So this kōrero today will be premising on what is Maramataka, why is it important, contextualising it. So I hope to use this time to build enthusiasm amongst today's audience to discuss and demonstrate what is Maramataka, why is it important, and how we have been using it here in the Whanganui, Rangitīkei, Ruapehu region to look at a systems approach. Okay, Maramataka 101. So Healthy Families Whanganui, Rangitīkei, Ruapehu has been evidencing Maramataka as an Indigenous organising system, a valuable framework for whānau to explore their self-worth, health and wellness. The Maramataka is the traditional Māori lunar calendar with various versions across Aotearoa. Historically, the Maramataka is known to have an influence on our emotions, the activities we engage in, guided us in te taiao, the natural environment, and also marks significant annual events. Maramataka is the fall or turning of the moon. It uses a concept of time that uses environmental and ecological indicators to observe and interact with the natural environment to help us to better understand our ebbs and flows. What does this mean? So for me personally, this is about activating our superpower as Māori and being unapologetically Indigenous. Mātauranga Māori systems and cultural values are considered something important that not only contributes to Māori success, but living by these values is seen as something that provides Māori with strength and a better understanding of themselves and their place in the world. We are noticing those that are recapturing their cultural identity are finding Maramataka as a safe practice for reinvigorating a sense of cultural connection. The Maramataka enhances our innate connection to the taiao, our natural environment, and helps us to build the narratives to understand how the taiao influences our well-being, helping us to return to a life of being more observant and present. It's a worldview where we have not only an ecocentric connection to the taiao, but a genetic DNA complex whakapapa that premises us as teina amongst our tuakana. The memories they hold, we hold in our toto and our DNA, both its beauty and trauma informed. Okay. Te Maramataka o Whanganui. So here you have the 30 phases that are associated to the Maramataka that is based here in the Whanganui region. So what I normally premise any of the kōrero I do around Maramataka as a practitioner is ko tō piki amo kura noi, ko tōku piki amo kura nōku, a whakatauki from Te Awatupua, from Te Rangitihi Tahu Pārai, as a reminder that your house of learning is yours and my house of learning is mine. You are the expert of your Maramataka. It aligns to your values and experiences. Having spent the past 4 years, I've been busy building a framework within our community, actually I'd say 6 years now, building a framework with our community to help us better use this Mātauranga within the cacophony of modernity. We are hearing from our communities across Aotearoa that kaupapa Māori approaches and Mātauranga Māori practices are fundamental and provide a deeper shift from a clinically led model to an ecocentric continuum of care. As part of the work that I've been doing here at Healthy Families Whanganui Rangitīkei Ruapehu, it has been in developing a way for us to contextualise how our people have been using the Maramataka. So these 2 years, in the last 2 years since this report's been out, which is a Maramataka Insights report that you can access on our Healthy Families website, we have begun overlaying data sets over the top of this Maramataka to test and observe the patterns that we might see. So the patterns that we discovered and then validated through understanding the whakapapa locally in terms of the phases was that 79% of our data show a correlation to a specific phase quadrant that was in line with some of the suicide data sets. So I know I'm not zooming in on this piece of information, but what it did identify, it's identified that from Timothy here as a starting point right through to Rautaki, we have found that 79% of those deaths by suicide occurred during specifically 5 phases on that. So this started 2 years ago, and as of the last month, we have actually managed to access a range of different data from both our DHB in terms of the suicide data for the last 5 years, and also family violence, family harm data sets as well for the last 5 years for our Whanganui, Rangitīkei, Ruapehu regions. So what this has meant, if you can see this, we have heard from our stakeholders in our different kaupapa that we have here, but this one's specific to the collaborative design for mental health and addictions, that when looking at data sets on paper, that they've never been able to see patterns, and therefore what we then have done is correlated the dates to the Maramataka phase. And so here is just a basic way of how we've done that. So it's outlining the Maramataka phases as they go every month, every marama, and then we have aligned each of those dates in line with those phases. So it's quite exciting to discover that there are patterns that we see within our mahi, especially with the current data sets. And these are new and exciting to see because it helps us now to look at different ways and how we can view what's happening in the system, and in this specific system is around the suicide. So from a Mātauranga Māori perspective, patterns are very much in line with the kōrero tuku iho and the whakapapa associated to those phases that are standing out in this data. I have also had just a read just around patterning. So Hagen writes about the value of everyday patterns for shifting systems. So looking at systems change Patterns helped us to navigate by making sense, identifying and practicing new patterns to detect weak signals of potentials for better outcomes. So that's just a way that we can then divert that over to a systems change piece. So what we have done here is we have then laid out along our walls of Post-its. The data that you will see here is the last 5 years of suicide deaths that have occurred in the Whanganui, Greater Whanganui region. So that covers the Whanganui, Rangitīkei, Ruapehu region. We've then taken each of those data points, which I've marked as dates, and placed them against the phase in which it occurred over those 5 years. And as you can see, there is some real strong correlation to what we were seeing in the very first instances 2 years ago when we started to explore this, specifically around the tamatea phase. So what we know for myself as a practitioner, when we think about tamatea, we think about Tāwhiri Mātia as an atua, and we think about the things that he brings into the space during those phases of tamatea. So really mindful that this happens every single marama. So the environmental indicators might be calm seas, turbulent beneath the surface. It's about neap tides, winds blowing create avenues for miscommunication. If we were to contemporize what that might look like in terms of that whakaaro Māori, ki te whakaaro Pākehā inaine. So that's what we know about tamatea. So the way in which I talk about the tamatea phases is when I talk about levels of miscommunication, that may be in the way that the wind is interacting with the tile. So when you go outside, it's quite windy. There's quite a lot of noise that happens. And we know that when there is excess noise, whether it's physical or metaphysical, it creates miscommunication. And so that's what we know with the tamatea phases. When we look deeper into those phases, these are things, some of the things that are happening. Also, what's also occurring is that you're having inconsistent tidal patterns. So what's happening out at sea is that here specifically in Whanganui, when we take our people out to go and have a look at what's interacting in tamatea, fishermen are normally out there because the sea is churning up a lot of the food from the bottom and shifting up higher. So you're getting a huge amount of activity underneath the surface. But when you're looking at the water looks very, very calm. So when we associate that to a person's behaviour, that's how it could be. It could be that someone is appearing like there's nothing wrong with them, and then they snap. And so when we look at the phase and we look at the data set that sits amongst that phase of suicide data, it helps us to sort of validate what we are hearing in the whakapapa kōrero associated to that. I also just wanted to lean into here in the Whanganui community, mental health is in a crisis. So Whanganui has one of the highest number of community treatment orders per head of population in the country, and the highest inpatient mental health readmission rates within a 28-day period. So according to the most recent statistics here in July 2021, the data is showing that our highest referrers with requests for urgent assessments are the police and emergency departments. There has been a significant increase in police and ED mental health crisis, new referrals and contacts over a period of 12 to 20 months. The responding to mental health events, the demands on police to deal with mental health calls are increasing by around 10% a year. It's envisaged that the increase will continue due to the impact of social stresses that contribute to mental distress. So I'm only mentioning all of this because what we're seeing is when there's pattern behaviours, there's a real opportunity for us to actually lean in and look for ways that we can look at prevention, especially with the Maramataka. So here is some information of some data that has looked at a family harm within the Whanganui, Rangitīkei, Ruapehu region. And these are just over 480 data points that have come in over the last 5 years that are presenting in our emergency department where there's been a disclosure of family harm. And what we have done is again put down the Maramataka and overlaid those dates against the Maramataka phases to see whether or not there is any pattern behaviours. And it's quite obvious for us when we look at this that there actually is. I did want to talk to the fact that family harm remains a significant issue in New Zealand. We have one of the highest rates of family harm in the OECD. In 2021-22, there was 175,000, just over 175,000 incidents of family harm investigations recorded, a 47% increase from 2017. The number of investigations with offences, though, have remained relatively unchanged. So what we're seeing here is, if I was to then look at the narrative of the Maramataka, so at the farthest end of this actual picture is Whiro, and so Whiro is the beginning new moon phase here in our Whanganui Maramataka, and it is seen as a dark new moon. However, it still has a lot of the same energy and ebbs and flows that are associated to a rākau nui moon. So the narrative surrounding Māori, Mutu Whenua and Whiro, which are the last two on this picture, the last two phases of those big lines, and the front end of this, which is the biggest number of incidents that are occurring. So from a Mātauranga Māori perspective, we know that these phases tend to have a very dark persona associated to them in terms of Whiro te atua. Also, what we also see is Rona and her digression of Hina te marama as a narrative, so Rona and the moon narrative, that also speaks into the behaviours that might occur during these phases. So if you're not aware, Rona was meant to be doing work, didn't do it, ended up doing that at a time that was not sufficient, tripped, fell over, and instead of being accepting of the behaviours of her lateness and her failure to prepare, she cursed the moon instead in its darkness, and he was taken up into the moon. So that's just one narrative that talks to Hina and Rona. So as the marama wanes and light from Hina is minimal, the ability to complete tasks is lessened. However, if you have not completed your task, you might feel rushed and panicked and pressured. And so that's the type of behaviours that can occur during the Mutu Whenua, Māori and Whiro phases. And so when we're seeing some of this data against it and we're seeing the high levels of it, we're not surprised by any of that. It actually makes sense for us as practitioners. So what this meant is that over the last 18 months, I've been testing our framework again, so the big blue framework that I showed at the beginning, within a kaupapa called Te Kākano Rangatahi Innovation here at Te Whanganui with our Waiora whānau team. And this initiative is about exploring how greater connection to Mātauranga Māori knowledge, to te taiao, the natural environment, and increased life skills grows young people's health and well-being. What that has meant is that we have explicitly gone into this rōpū to talk about the Maramataka and how they might engage with the Maramataka to better understand their own personal health journeys as rangatahi. So this has been happening for the last 18 months. What we're hearing and what we're seeing is patterns of behaviour change aligned to the Maramataka, which we've identified and tracked with the rangatahi. We're seeing increased responsiveness to the connection of self-awareness and learning about te tao Māori, with rangatahi leaning into the new learning and insight of how traditional systems are applied in the world today. What we're also seeing is behaviour change captured and observed, increased hygiene, awareness of sexual energies, more frequent communication, effects of kai intake recognised, and the moods identified. We're also seeing rangatahi active and reflective practice, sharing feelings, emotions and experiences, learning more about the emotional state of being, Rangatahi are recalling their internal dialogue regarding suicidal thoughts during different phases and supplying tools and support to manage those emotional needs that do come up. We're also seeing rangatahi actively participate as designers of the resources that they would use throughout the process to capture their reflections. So we've had them come through to actually do the design piece of their Maramataka journals. And what we're also finding is that the team that leads out this program in our Te Kākano team are also alongside the rangatahi learning deeper knowledge around the Maramataka and then adapting their own practices to improve the engagement and interactions with rangatahi, which has come about really successfully. So this has become our reality check. To reality check again that the framework that we've created is actually still pono and tika to what we're trying to discover. Alongside this, the Future Reality Wellbeing Spectrum and Support Continuum that I've got up here is a framework that was created as part of our work in the team that has been doing backboning in the space of growing collective wellbeing here in Whanganui. So this was originally set up as a suicide prevention, but actually what we've decided is we've flipped that whole entire narrative around to what and how we think about suicide prevention in Aotearoa. So with a focus really on the wellbeing spectrum. So as well as capturing the data sets, overlaying them in correlation with the Maramataka, we're also looking at this wellbeing spectrum in terms of our Maramataka as well. So what does this mean? As I premised at the very beginning of this, a lot of what we're doing also talks about our innate connection to our taio, the environment, and Indigenous goes hand in hand. And so it should be noted that I like this saying here from Waina Jackson, colonisation has always been a process where people are dispossessed of their lands, lives, and power. The taking away of the land from people who live as people of the land is not simply some passing land loss. It is an ongoing rupture that fractures the essential spiritual and practical ties to identity and belonging. A people cannot be tangata whenua if they have no whenua to be tangata upon. So I talk to this because the opportunity exists now to reimagine, learn and test new ways of thinking and observing, to apply our narrative to the gnarly, complex issues we face and unpack them using our kōrero tuku iho. Systems thinking and innovation are innately Indigenous. It's a viewpoint that puts emphasis on the many different ways for creating the conditions for wellbeing and helping to rebalance key institutions and policies that have been harmful and potentially still compound inequity. Maramataka is the opportunity to look back at the natural instinctive driver of innovation that our tupuna use to help us to weave within the two worlds of Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā, to be autonomous in our decisions and more specifically our futures. This is about prevention. Environmental understanding is critical in the shaping of our Indigenous knowledge, our worldview as Māori. Doherty, 2014, argues that the environment itself shapes and influences the language, and it is in the environment that knowledge is witnessed, experienced, explained, and conceptualized. What I wanted to leave here is a QR code that, if downloaded onto your device, will overlay a very simple Maramataka onto your calendar, whether it's on your phone or on your Outlook, both through Apple or through a Samsung. Samsung may ask you for more information to download as a basic file. What it will do, it will come up with a QRMe website. You just wait for the end of that to finish and you say skip the advertisement. So for a Samsung, it will automatically download the basic, and then you then add that to your calendar that you choose. For an Apple, it will normally automatically open up your calendar on your Apple phone and drop the link into there. So what this does, this gives the next forecast of the Maramataka across people's phones, because the number one point around Maramataka is to start engaging with it. It occurs every single day, or every day, night. So it's on the rising of the moon. And that's how this is set up so that you can start to use it, contextualize it. Mātauranga Māori, I guess, is a real practical application. The way in which it's disseminated to us is always also being done through kōrero tuku iho and practical applications. So I'm really, really fortunate that I've been raised in that type of a background. So yeah, so this has come about with me quite naturally. But yeah, really excited about the potential that exists now when we start to look at this data in a different light and what we can start talking about with our stakeholders in terms of what they can do to actually create some real shift around wellbeing specifically. So yeah, I'm going to leave it open now for any questions that anyone might have. I was actually hoping to be a little bit longer, but I've obviously talked through this whole entire presentation. Stop sharing and open it up to see if anyone's got questions.
Kia ora, Meretini. Thank you so much for your kōrero. I guess one of my pātai is about the barriers. You talked about gaining access to the information. So were there any other barriers that you had in this kaupapa?
So really it is that is one of the biggest barriers, is just to be able to access this information. We've got really good partnerships with stakeholders here in the Whanganui region, but it may not be the same for everybody. And because we're also asking them not just to give us the data sets, but to give us the data sets in regards to the actual days that they're occurring. So then we can overlay that on the Maramataka. But yeah, that's really, I guess, one of the biggest barriers that you're going to face is starting to how you access and who are the conversations that need to occur. What I really love about it is there is a real need for cultural competency to be really understood when we think about what we're learning from this kōrero, when we put it against the Maramataka, so that cultural competency around the whiro phases, the cultural competency around the tamatea phases, like you have to start the conversations now in order to get some real critical understanding about it, because if it's happening consistently, there's real intervention that can occur now. Okay, I'm just going to answer Kathy's message there around, do you think that this could be used for, okay, let me go into, I'm just going to open that. And alcohol harm. So yes, absolutely. I do think it, and it's just a matter of, again, getting access to the data. So I'm really mindful that when I'm talking about the data, a lot of them, when they've sent it through to me, it's like, oh, this is July, this is August, but they're not giving me the actual specifics. And I really do need the specifics to actually overlay that on the Maramataka. We're currently waiting for 2 lots of data to still come through. One is from the police in terms of family harm. So being really mindful that the data, the 480 plus data points that we did get for the last 5 years have come from the DHB. They are based on the number of cases going in where they are formally identifying that they are in there because of family harm. So that's really important to note that that is real, definitive, I guess, data that talks about what's actually occurring on the ground. We're so privileged here to be able to access our community voice, that because that's what these data points are. They're our community voice. And so we're really privileged to be able to access that, and for them to be able to give it to us in a way that we can then show them a new way of looking at it. So to have some of our mental health workers that are out there working, getting these data sets at the end of every month and not being able to correlate it to anything, and then walk into the space and see, you know, without a word of a lie, that there is specific phases that this is occurring, that's a real game changer for them. And it's a real game changer for us in validating that, I guess.
I think that was the thing that, thank you for your thoughts around that. We've just been buzzing out here while we're listening to you talk. I think it's a really, like that amount of work to get that data and then just portray it in such a powerful way with the post-it notes. I think it's just also acknowledging that that's lives that are up on the board there, right? And it's just like really that work, like the spirit side of that work that you are doing, holding that space. Just wanted to acknowledge that, and also just seeing how this could be scaled into so much of our other work. Particularly around in the workplace wellbeing space, but at a whole different level from listening to you talk about that. So I can feel a road trip coming on.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, I'm just going to read K's. Tēnā koe, Kay. Do you think that each rohe needs to source the data specific to the community and phases and how the Maramataka varies for each environment? Yes. So I'm really, really mindful that dependent on your rohe, your Maramataka is going to be a little bit different. What I will premise, though, is that 90% of the whakaaro and the kōrero tukuiho that has come down through a lot of the Maramataka is very similar, but it is very seasonally based and place-based that makes it so beautiful and uniquely different to your rohe. So if you are, for myself, I live in the central North Island, and therefore I'm bounded by maunga and awa, not by the sea. And so therefore my Maramataka is going to align to that type of environment. And that's the same as if you're West Coast or East Coast, that all of these different varying phases. But 90% of our information is is generally around about the same, but the depth of the knowledge of each phase will be different at each location as well. So I hope that's answered it, Kay.
Ai, kia ora.
Any other questions?
I also have another one. You talked about rangatahi uptake and this kaupapa and how they were really, their response to it. Can you comment on Pakeke and Kaumātua as well?
So yes, I can. From a Pakeke and Kaumātua perspective, this was very much at the very beginning. So really mindful that Healthy Families has been part of, here in the Whanganui, Rangitīkei, Ruapehu region, have been a real stronghold in the reclamation, remembering of the Maramataka in our region again. And when I first started the research of all of this back in 2017, 2018, number one, I recognised that I already lived like this and have been living like this all of my life. And in doing so, I was able to go back to the people that I've learnt a lot of that kōrero tukuiho from. And so when I did that, I went back to our kaumātua, kaunihera, both here in Whanganui and in the Rangitīkei and some of the Ruapehu region, asking them to give me kōrero around the Maramataka that they knew. Now, number one, a lot of them didn't know the word Maramataka. So none of them had really heard that as a word. However, when you talk about what the Maramataka, what I wanted to know was, how did you garden? How did you fish? How did you know what to do when you went out to go and gather rongoa? Well, how did you know how to do all of these things? What we then found out is that all of them had practical knowledge. So we're bearing in mind that this generation, my father's generation, born in the 50s, my grandmother in the 1930s, was a real change around what was happening in the education setting around the use of te reo. So my grandmother was told, that was not going to be any help for her. Having any understanding of all of that knowledge was no good for her. My father was the same. However, the practical application was applied throughout their whole entire upbringing. So moving forward into the future, we now have 50 years of te reo being #1 priority back in, in terms of this year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of te reo in the mainstream. We've celebrated 40 years of te koanga reo movement. So te awho matua, we've got all of these amazing reo components out there now. We've got practical application from our Pākeke and our kaumātua, and bringing those two worlds together has created real empowerment. Our Pākeke, without the reo, have been able to join the dots up for our learners of the reo to create some context now to the actual language. It's not just about them giving thanks to maru. Our kaumātua have the kōrero and the practical knowledge of why you gave thanks to maru without the language. And so you've got these two worlds that are now combining and creating real empowerment, a real empowerment narrative for our people. So does that help? Okay,
Thank you.
I've got Leanne here. Did the data you gathered also include the Rangitīkei or here? Yes, it did. So the data that we're gathering is specifically covering the Whanganui region wide. So the suicide data sets come straight out of He Patuora here in the Whanganui DHB, old DHB. And that's the same as the A&E. And so, yes, we are on the lookout at the moment in terms of some of that deeper family harm data sets from the police, sourcing them from police data, which will probably require me to then get access across the region then. At the moment, we have relationships here locally, but we would have to make connections with our other iwi providers to get access to the other areas in the Ruapehu and the upper and lower Rangitīkei regions. Sorry. Any other questions? No. So I guess the biggest thing now is just to, how might people want to start this type of a journey? So number one, we've been really fortunate here in the Whanganui Rangitīkei Ruapehu district, where we are doing kaupapa around growing collective wellbeing, which has a whole bunch of new stakeholders that sit within that space. We have the collaborative around mental health and addiction services and looking at the integration of that in this region, both the Whanganui Rangitīkei and the Ruapehu region. And because of that, we have been able to get access to a range of different stakeholders across our region, which is helping us to start building what we're starting to see in this pattern behaviour for Maramataka. And then we're able to get them into our spaces. I've also been really fortunate in my work as a practitioner of Maramataka as well, that I have a collective of people that I can then seek support to also help me in terms of the Mātauranga Māori expertise that sits in this space. So I have quite a lot of people that I then go to in terms of a collective. And I was going to say, I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, I guess that just really mindful that we've built up over the last 4 or 5 years some real critical friends in order to help us move this forward. Actually, right now I'm in a space of calling in some of these Maramataka practitioners currently in our region. Really want to put the hand out there to anyone else that might want to come in and have a look at some of this data, and starting to get our people to have a look through what we're seeing, the pattern behaviours, what they understand about some of those phases, just to give us some real, to lean into the space, I guess, and find some opportunity for how we can create some impactful change.
Kia ora, Miri. I've just got a question for you. This might be helpful for all of us here, but I was just wondering, I've just downloaded I've just scanned the QR code, and it goes all the way up to the end of this year.
Yes.
How can we get that renewed for 2023?
There is no easy algorithm currently for the development of what I've done in the overlay, so it actually takes a little bit of time for me to go through. I've currently just done the new one, but I test it for a month just to make sure that there's no kinks in it. I'm really mindful that moving forward with other apps that there might be a better algorithm for it, but it needs to be established every year and then checked seasonally. So it can't just go as this is 30 days and we spread it over across the Gregorian calendar. It doesn't work like that. It really has to have me interacting and engaging in that space constantly to make sure that the information that's coming across is real relevant. But in saying that, there's so many different ways to access and resources out there currently at the moment that you can get information from. So in our region of Whanganui, so our Ngāti Maniapoto whānau, they have an app called Mātauranga. And so that does some natural, they've got the algorithms going that their app automatically updates, as far as I know. We also have the Hina app. I know that on the Hina app, you can also change the phase names to suit your region, but I'm not using that currently, so I'm not too sure exactly how the specifics of that space works. You've got people like Tuhu Stationery that are doing calendars. The biggest shout out, I guess, for me when I first started out in this space was around Mana Whenua, when they, with Hene Hotereni, creating their big, huge A0 calendar that they have for the far north. So that's another resource that you can get. Yeah, there's quite a lot of people out there that are currently making them, but at the moment, I only do this one until the end of the year, and then I renew it at the beginning of the year. Normally, I do it around Mātauranga. I will reboot it just to align with a real Māori worldview, actually. That's the reason why I do it then. But yeah, it does take a little bit of time to collate that information and put it together, but really trying to find a way that we can make it a little bit easier for our people. This is a natural thing. So for me, I'm at a point now in the way that I do things that I understand what the phase is before I know what the actual date is. So that's just the way that I work now. I know that today is kore ki tangaro, and so I'm working within my work mahi around what that might mean for me to be really productive. I'll tell you one thing though, with kore phases, huge overthinking. It's about creativity. Your creativity is on a high. All of that high energy that would have been associated to your physical tinana during the Rākaunui, Rākau Mātohi Takido phases has now shifted to your hinengaro. And so my overthinking is in hyperdrive at the moment. So. Well, I think that's about it.
Right. Can I just add a little bit of information about how Waitakere, we put the Maramataka into our Outlook calendar. Just because we haven't found an app that works for the Maramataka that we use. And I do that using an Excel spreadsheet and changing it every month. And then I just put it in my calendar and just invite everybody to it. And so I do that like 3 months in advance. And if it's a smaller workplace that wants to test it, that's another way if the apps don't work as well.
Yeah, that's what mine is based off. It's based off a Excel file as well. Also, I forgot about Maramataka o Taurawa, so that's another website that you can go to as well to have a look at information. Ka pai? Okay. I might close that here. With a bit of a ruriko. E tau nei ki rongi a tātou katoa, te wairua o ngā mātua tupuna, nā rātou I wakatākoto te ara na hei hi koinga mā tātou ngā uri, e wakatōkia a tātou ngā kau ki ngā tipunga hei aratā ki ngā I a tātou mahi katoa I roto I te tika I te pono I te maramatanga me te aroha anō o tētahi ki tētahi. Koe ara e rongo waka irihea ki runga kia Tina, Tina hui e taiki. Kia ora rā tātou.